Right now, you have a device in your hand or within arm's reach that contains every song ever recorded, every book ever written, every conversation you have ever had, every photograph you have ever taken, the entire accumulated knowledge of human civilization, and a direct line to every person you have ever known. You carry it everywhere. You look at it within minutes of waking up. You look at it before you fall asleep. Most people, if asked to sit in a room alone with nothing for 30 minutes, would find it genuinely difficult. This became normal in roughly 15 years, which means there are people alive right now who spent the majority of their lives without it, who grew up, fell in love, raised children, built careers, experienced joy and grief and boredom and connection without a single notification ever interrupting any of it. And if you ask them what they did with their time, the answer is not that they were bored and waiting. The answer is something more complicated and more interesting than that. They were present, completely, unavoidably, sometimes uncomfortably present. Boredom was real, not the modern version, the low-grade restlessness that appears when a page takes 3 seconds to load, but actual boredom, the kind that sits with you, the kind that has weight. You were somewhere and there was nothing to do, and you had to simply be there, in your own head, with your own thoughts, until something changed. This happened regularly, on long car journeys, in waiting rooms, at family gatherings that had run out of conversation, in the 10 minutes between arriving somewhere and the event starting, and out of that boredom came things. Daydreaming was not a waste of time. It was a primary occupation. The human mind, left without external input, does not go blank. It generates. It wanders through problems, imagines scenarios, rehearses conversations, builds worlds. Neuroscience research on the default mode network, the brain system that activates when the mind is not focused on an external task, shows that this wandering state is one of the most metabolically active states the brain ever enters. The bored brain is a working brain. It is processing, consolidating, creating. The interruption of that process, which smartphones accomplish approximately once every few minutes, has consequences that researchers are only beginning to map. People read, not scrolling, reading, long books, dense books, books that required sustained attention across days and weeks. A single novel could occupy a person's evenings for a month, and because that was the entertainment available, not one of 10,000 options, but the thing on the nightstand, it received full attention. The kind of reading that reaches inside a person and rearranges something. The kind that is increasingly difficult to do when a device nearby is offering alternatives. People watched less television than most people now assume. The average American household in 1970 watched around 6 hours of television per day, but that number masks something important. The television was often on as background, as shared family presence, not as individualized consumption. The family gathered around a single screen at a scheduled time to watch a program that everyone watched together, and that would not be available again until the rerun. You could not pause it. You could not rewatch it. If you missed it, you missed it. This created a shared cultural experience that has almost entirely disappeared. A Monday morning where everyone who watched the same thing had the same reference point. Collective memory built from collective attention. But most of the time, people were not watching television. They were talking to each other, not messaging, not commenting, talking. In person, for long stretches, without the exit option of a screen to retreat to when conversation became slow or awkward or difficult. Families ate dinner together and the dinner table was the event. Friends called each other on landline telephones, not to arrange meeting, but to talk for an hour, sometimes more, with full attention on the conversation because there was nothing else competing for it. The voice was the whole message. There was no text running below it, no profile to check, no images to scroll while half listening, just the voice. Letters existed, real ones. A letter took days to arrive, sometimes weeks. You wrote it knowing that the person reading it would do so in a different moment, a different context, possibly a different emotional state than the one you were writing from. This forced a kind of deliberateness. You could not send an impulsive message and regret it in 30 seconds. You thought about what you wanted to say. You chose words with awareness of their permanence. And when a letter arrived, it was an event, a physical object that someone had held, that carried their handwriting, that had traveled to reach you. People kept letters for decades. People still find letters from the dead in shoeboxes and read them and feel the presence of someone gone. The textures of daily time were different. Grocery shopping was a social event. Not because people particularly wanted it to be, but because it took longer, involved real interaction with people you recognized, and couldn't be done from a couch. The pharmacist knew your name. The person at the post office knew your name. The cashier at the grocery store who had seen you every Saturday for 3 years knew something about your life. These small, repeated interactions, brief, transactional, seemingly trivial, formed a texture of community that most people didn't notice until it was gone. People waited and thought that waiting was normal. You waited for news. You waited for photographs to be developed. You waited for a letter. You waited for the weekend edition of the newspaper to find out what had happened during the week. You waited for the sequel to come out in a year. Waiting was not a malfunction of the system. It was the system. And inside that waiting, anticipation had time to build into something real. The album you had been looking forward to for months and finally heard the day it came out was an experience with a weight behind it. The film you had seen the trailer for in a cinema and then waited 6 months to see occupied a space in your imagination that something available instantly cannot occupy. People were physically restless in different ways. Without a device to occupy hands and eyes in every idle moment, the body moved more incidentally. You walked to the shop because calling ahead wasn't the obvious option. You went outside because inside had run out of things to offer. Children played outside not because parents made them, but because outside was where the options were. The neighborhood was a social network, not metaphorically, but literally. You knew who lived on your street. You borrowed things from them. You argued with them. You watched their children grow up. There was privacy in a form that no longer exists. Your thoughts were yours. Your whereabouts were known only to people you told. Your photographs existed in physical albums that nobody saw unless you showed them. Your embarrassments faded because there was no permanent record. You could change, move to a new city, become a different person. And the old version of you did not follow in searchable form. Identity was not an archive. It was a present tense thing, renegotiated constantly, not fixed by what you had posted at 19. None of this is an argument that the past was better. The past had its own brutalities, its own loneliness, its own wasted time. People were bored in ways that were not productive. People were isolated in ways that caused real suffering. Information that could have saved lives was unavailable. Distances that smartphones collapse were genuinely separating. But something existed in that time that is worth understanding clearly. Not to recover it, that is not possible. But to know what was there, what the texture of a life felt like when attention had nowhere else to go but where you were. When the person in front of you was the only option. When the moment you were in was the only moment available. Most people who lived it did not know they had it. Most people who have lost it are only beginning to understand what it was.